Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. George Osborne's budget yesterday was nothing more than an attempt to...
What the Honourable Lady has to say, the Chancellor of the Exchequer or the Honourable Member.
The Chancellor's budget yesterday was nothing more than an attempt to confirm that austerity is king for this government. Ideology has blocked the path of any attempt to ease the burden on the backs of the less well-off. Even if you set aside the cuts to welfare and capital spending, the OBR estimates that Westminster funding for day-to-day public services is forecast to fall between 2009-10 to 2019-20 by the equivalent of around £1,800 per head. Chillingly, the Institute of Fiscal Studies predicts that the scale of the cuts to departmental budgets and local government will reduce the role of the state to a point where it would have, quote, changed beyond recognition, with £3.5 billion of new cuts in this budget. And that is an additional £3.5 billion of cuts for 2019-20, which will once again hit unprotected departments. And the Chancellor of the Exchequer has not specified where that money will come from either. And Scotland faces a £1.5 billion cut in its funding for public services, which means between 2010 and 11 and 2019-20, Scotland's fiscal DEL budget has been reduced by an eye-watering 12.5% in real terms. Madam Deputy Speaker, I listened earlier to this government lauding its support for young people, but we've already witnessed the slashing of student maintenance grants for some of the poorest students and then being converted into loans. We know that housing benefit for unemployed 18 to 21-year-olds has been scrapped, which will create enormous hardship for young people. And we know that student fees will continue to rise. We know that student nurses will no longer receive grants, but loans instead. And all calls for the post-study work visa in Scotland to be reintroduced have gone unheeded. Of course, we welcome the support for the oil and gas industry, as far as it goes. But what is really required is a strategic review of the whole tax regime for oil and gas, and the SNP has called for such a review of the whole tax regime ahead of the budget, but again, these have gone unheeded. The freeze on fuel duty is to be welcomed. This is a victory for small business and rural communities such as Arran in my own constituency, and will also be welcomed by stretched family budgets across the UK. But more than anything, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a budget which bolsters and consolidates inequality across the United Kingdom. Increasing the personal tax allowance is a very expensive way to badly targets help for the low-paid. And this is the view of the Child Poverty Action Group, and the government should take note. It is not a social justice measure when 85% of the £2 billion of the Treasury spend goes to the top half and a third goes to the top 10%. For every £1,000 the personal tax allowance goes up, basic tax rate payers gain £200. But universal credit rules will claw back 65% of that gain from the low-paid, leaving them only gaining a maximum of £70 a year. And child poverty campaigners have concluded that this budget sets the next generation up to be the poorest for decades. But there's still money, Madam Deputy Speaker, for between 15 and £100 billion to be found to renew Trident. But disability rights groups have warned that the changes will be a devastating blow to disabled people. This is a budget of missed opportunities.